Good morning. I am Lauren Cook, your Dean of College and Gap Year Advising, and you are in the first coffee with Ms. Cook of the new class year, I guess, for the class of 2026. A couple of housekeeping items up top. First of all, everyone, the default here is to be on mute in my room. Please just stay there for the moment. I'm going to do just a little bit of content up top, and then we can just move on to questions that can be live or in the chat, whatever you're comfortable with. And we are recording. I try and distribute to everyone really as quickly as Mr. McDonald can get it up on YouTube. So hopefully by tomorrow. And these are always meant to be an hour-long program. So if we tap out on questions by 8:45, terrific. But otherwise, we will make a hard stop at 9. So I think that's the openers. So I want to just give a couple of updates of what's happening at school with your kids, because I know the children have a range of communication styles with you about what's going on. So I've met with most of the junior class at this point. I think I have 7 or 8 more appointments to go through the middle of next week. And in these meetings, I have been talking with your kids about their questionnaires and just asking some follow-up questions. Some folks were very descriptive and verbal, and some were not. So just to try and get a better idea of them and where they're at this moment. We've been discussing their college preferences, if they have some at this moment, and I'm also asking some questions that I hope is getting them to think about some questions around size and location and Jewish community and what might end up being some priorities for them. And then trying to compile some recommendations based on those early thoughts and preferences. Obviously, hopefully, many of you sent me questionnaires as well, so I'm quietly making note of those preferences that you might have, and if they diverge a little bit from your child, and working to try and see how we can meet in the middle. And then we're talking about some pieces of the application. So I'm checking in on testing. Some folks have gotten started. Some people are sure that they're not going to test, and some are somewhere in the middle. So we're just picking apart what might be best for them. We're doing some brainstorming on recommendations from professional community members at JCHS. Most applications require 2 from academic teachers. And then if there are folks outside of school or in the community or extracurricularly at JCHS, that might make sense. And we wait until the end of the school year for them to make those requests, because we do want to give some more time to the spring semester and develop those relationships in classes. And also course scheduling is going to start in a few weeks for their senior year. And so by the end of the school year, we also may have a sense of the teachers they will have in senior year, if there might be some repeat offenders and whatnot. So we will meet again in April or May to confirm some of those early choices. And then I try and end the meetings by echoing back to them what their college advising homework is for the next few months. So if students are going to pursue testing, they need to try and book at least 1 sitting, if not 2, to do in May, June, July. I think it depends on the test, what the latest date is you're able to do at this point. And then think about how they're going to prepare for it, anywhere from free resources online to if they want to go all the way to one-on-one tutoring. And then to research colleges. This is a shopping period. So anyone who's met with me has gotten a list of suggestions and score, or maybe just a handful to round out what was already there. And they then should be adding and subtracting from that list. If there are schools that they decide they're interested in that you would like them to look at, to have them move those to their following column in score. They use social media speak there. So things that are in the following column, I then know your child is actually interested in, or move things into not interested that aren't in places or too big, or have certain specifications that don't work for them. And then we'll want to think about how you're going to do some research. So I'm encouraging them to think about virtual visits online, sit in on an info session, or do a virtual tour. And you may want to spend some part of Pesach break or the summer starting to get on college campuses and seeing what some places look like, and whether that's locally and having local places be stand-ins for places further away, maybe big publics or urban campuses or suburban campuses, or utilizing, your own family travel to go out and check out places further away. And so when I'm through with my first student meeting with your child, and we move into February, I'm happy to schedule meetings with any of you. If you have questions you want to meet privately, or if you want to have the family come together, and we can do those in person, you could Zoom in with your student in my office, or we can just email, as questions come up. Everyone has a different set of needs at this point, but know that my schedule does free up. I actually kind of call February my summer, which annoys my colleagues, but things calm down a little bit for me as seniors have their apps in, and I've done the first launching of juniors. So I'm here as you need me for questions and whatnot. And things may come up organically in the next few weeks as we get into course scheduling, and there may be some questions about advanced courses for next year, language, math, placement, all of the sorts of things that come up as we look at them completing their high school curriculum. I will note that I may be out here and there, and I haven't made a wide announcement about this, but just know that my father's in hospice care in Ohio. And so I was with him this past weekend. I'll be going back in February over the long weekend. So just keeping an eye on things. Nothing seems imminent, but it is going to be a theme, I think, of my year. So I will always try and let folks know if I'm going to be out for more than, a day or two of a school day. And then finally, a couple dates to save as we look towards the spring. Next week, this is not something that junior families are currently on the invite for, but it is on the college advising calendar. There is a college money method session on Monday, January 27th, that is targeted towards 9th and 10th grade families, just about understanding your ability to pay, how aid eligibility works, how colleges are looking at methodology. If you haven't attended a session like that, or if you haven't attended any of the college money method sessions, know that you're welcome to pop into that. The link is for Zoom is on the college advising calendar. And if you can't find that, let me know if you're interested in going. As always, those sessions run from 6:30 usually to 8 or so on Zoom. And Paul's great and just can break down some basics of financial aid. And then April 27th, something to just sketch out on your calendar now. That is a Sunday. Every year in the spring, we have a program called the Case Study Program. If any of you have had other children go through the college process, you may be familiar with this. But the Case Study Program brings together all, I think, 10 or so of the independent schools in San Francisco. This will be at USF, so not far from the JCHS campus, just a mile up the road. And so there's about 1,000 people that attend because it is often juniors and a parent or both parents. And we have about 100 college reps come from around the country to this program, and it's split into two parts. The first part is the case study. So it is sort of a mock admission process that is led by those college visitors that are there to recruit your kids. And it's an hour or so session where you are reviewing some sort of fake practice applications for a practice institution. And everyone that does this program says that they find it really useful to hear from college reps about how they're viewing pieces of the application. And then you in that classroom, and it's small groups, 15 or 20 parents or students, make decisions on admitting someone, waitlisting someone, denying someone. So you go through a bit of the motions in a relatively contrived way. But if you haven't been through this process before in particular, I think it can be useful to understand how they're viewing pieces of the application, what's getting emphasized, and hearing directly from college reps. And then the second half of the program is a college fair. And it is gigantic because there are 100 some schools and there are a lot of folks in attendance. So it's not a place where you can have 20 conversations with different colleges, but it is a place where if there are 3 or 4 schools you're interested in, might want to know more about, to get on their radar, have a conversation with the rep, and launch a bit of a relationship. So that's the Case Studies Program, April 27th at USF. It's typically somewhere between 2 and 5 in the afternoon. So have that on your radar. There's no like recording of it, because it's got this workshop element. So it's sort of a one-shot deal. But I will send many more reminders about it. I just know it's good to have this on the calendar. And yes, Nell, thank you. You did this with Bear. And yeah, I think it is really helpful. And you don't have to sign up for that at this moment. I do think there will be a registration later on that I will have access for. And the sign up really is for the college fair portion of things. Parents and students get a QR code because, now we're highly technical that can just be scanned by a college rep. And you get sort of scanned on the way in the door to know how many folks actually attended. So I'll send that out. It will likely be March when the registration comes up, but just throw it on your calendar now. Okay, with that, that's my content. So I'm curious to know for the next 50 minutes or so if you all have questions about the process at this point, about things that might be coming up. And this is obviously a good time for more general, big picture things rather than something highly technical about your particular child. But feel free to either put something in the chat or unmute yourself. You can put your little Zoom hand up and we can chat for a little bit. So, questions?
Hi, I have a
Now,
question.
you can unmute yourself.
Hi, I wanted to know if how you can encourage on your side um, going to look at schools, and if there are any schools nearby that have weekend tours, because I looked at Santa Clara, I've looked at multiple schools, and they only seem to be during the week,
Yeah.
and I can't pull Ari out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tricky. And I think as we get into spring break time and when they have rounds of admitted students as well, so later March and April, some places may expand those visit schedules to include weekends. Now, that often just means Saturday. So if you honor Shabbat, that may not work for you. Sunday is rarely a time just because they end up usually not having buildings unlocked and whatnot. But I would keep checking for March and April dates to see if there's any expansion. But otherwise, yeah, the time where I think it's okay to have a student out of school might be more into the fall as you get into, more serious choices that you're trying to get a sort of yes or no on applying on. And I will also say I was just in our calendar meeting yesterday where we start putting all the dates in for next year. And a lot of days off in the fall on weekdays, especially Sukkot. So that's an option as well. But I do try and encourage students to be open to the campus visits at this point. Know that it wildly varies, as you may all be seeing with your kids, as to how locked in they are to this process. And some folks are not, they will have the obligatory meeting with me and then try not to make eye contact with me again for another month or two. And that's okay. Just know that the peer culture as we go into the spring here will, and trust me, will sort of lift them into the wave of this is what everybody's doing. So even if you're getting some resistance in the next few weeks, that will change. And they will start talking about college essays in their English class. There will be repeat meetings with me. And so I will encourage it. You can encourage it. But know if there's a little resistance now, it probably won't stay that way for terribly long. But I would encourage trying to get just onto some local campuses. So doing a UC tour at some point, just for the big research public institution, doing something private like USF or Santa Clara, something even smaller like St. Mary's over in Moraga or Dominican up in Marin, just to get a sense of types and sizes and all of that. They don't necessarily have to be interested in any of these schools, but it's hard to develop preferences if you've never been on a campus. Some folks may have run around the Berkeley campus or whatnot, but otherwise, this may be the first time that they're really sort of experiencing things aesthetically and all the rest. So I don't know how much that addressed your question, Lisa, but
And that's helpful. Two additional questions.
yeah.
One, are there any online, do you encourage them to look at the online tours, or are they really stilted? And then second, when do they open up some of these tours? Because we were thinking of going to the East Coast to see family, and
Yep.
do a tour there. And
Yep.
what I found was some of the schools have nothing on their calendar except for
Yeah.
one big event. And
Yep.
it's like driving 6 hours one place and then 6 hours back doesn't
Right.
seem practical.
Yeah. So, to the question about when calendars will open, some schools aren't even back in session, some colleges, until maybe this week or next week if they have a January term of some sort. And so some of those schedules are being very driven on whether like their tour guides are back on campus and know what their class schedule is, right? So
Okay.
they will begin rolling out those schedules soon, because they do know that, spring break and certainly April as admitted students visit, are big times for visitors. So I would say check back on like February 1st. And hopefully
Okay.
by then they should have things rolled out at least through April. And remind me again what the first question was.
Virtual tours, worth it or
Virtual
not?
tours. Yeah. I will say the virtual tours can widely vary. They got a lot better during COVID, as you can imagine, and just
Right.
after. But it's the virtual information sessions that I think can actually be the best because whether you're sitting in a room listening to an admission officer, maybe a student, maybe a faculty member, or sitting in a Zoom room, there's very little difference there. The content is going to be really similar. And that's going to give you the basic overview of the campus, the size, the where the kids come from, the percentage on aid, like that kind of thing. And then, often you will hear from a student, maybe a faculty member if you're lucky, but certainly an admission officer too, about experience on the ground as a student, and then the admission process and how selective it is, how to navigate it, what's required, et cetera. And oftentimes those are not longer than half an hour. So it's a low time commitment, to sit online for that. And if you do register for those things, especially at a lot of private schools or smaller colleges, you are earning that like demonstrated interest credit, which not everyone cares about, but generally the private schools and the smaller schools are collecting some of that data. So even if you don't hang in through the whole info session, you've gotten credit for like the interest in it. So I hope
Okay.
that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Now
great.
you've patiently had your Zoom hand up. Are you still there?
Yeah, yeah, I'm
Great.
here. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I had a question just about visiting, like when the school is closed, and I see someone else have that question too about summer tours. Like, you know, how like we're going to be back east in May, but the school's already closed. So we're
Mhm.
going to tour, but I'm just wondering, I mean, just like our drive around, but I'm
Yeah.
just wondering how important do you think it is to try to get to schools when they're open?
Great question. I think, especially for folks on a budget and for folks mindful of missing school, both of these things are important. I would say it is more important to try and see that campus, even if it's closed, because you're still going to get a sense of, is there a walkable town from here? If you're taking a formal tour, it's still with a current student. So you can still get some, data about what it's like to be on that campus. You miss the people watching element of things. You might miss the opportunity to sit in on a class, but that's not necessarily important for an introductory visit anyway. I think, a basic overview is going to give you an info session and a tour. And that's really, especially for a 17-year-old, that may be enough, and let's move on to the next place. I think that any place that ends up being a serious contender, that either, you're thinking about an early decision application, making that commitment. That's the one where if you're accepted, you're saying you're going to go. Or if you're to the point of trying to decide if you're enrolling, next March or April, then you might want to do a return visit when there are kids there. But I would take advantage of all already planned travel and everything now and just try and get there. And same thing with this summer. Yes, it's maybe a little quieter, so you're not going to always get the sense of the energy on the campus, but you will still almost always have that tour with a student. There are students that are employed there during the summer on campuses, and you'll get the aesthetics of the place and some general information, and that is better than nothing. So, or better than trying to envision it online. I will say last year I was flown in for a counselor program at Syracuse University. And it's one of the few times, but it was really staggering to me where I had an idea in my head about what the school was. And then when I got there, I was like, oh my God, this is not at all what I thought it was. And so, and to the positive. And so I do think there's something to just standing in the middle of the campus and being like, oh, this is what we're talking about, whether it's in session or not. So Hopefully that helps.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Then there's one other, Avril had a question in the chat about the percentage of kids who do a gap year, go to college the following year, or the other way, how many kids fall off the college wagon and don't find their way back to school. I would say almost no one that does a gap year falls off the college wagon. I will say that those numbers are minuscule. And if you want to factor this into that equation, it's because I will say, 90% or so of our kids that do a gap year are going to Israel. Every once in a while, there will be one that will make Aliyah who will decide, I want to stay here. And sometimes they enlist in the IDF, the real enthusiastic ones, that was pre the war. Sometimes they may enroll in an Israeli college. And so they're not off the college wagon, they've just changed their plan. But most students that do their gap year go through the planned year and come back, go to college, and are really happy to have had that moment of sort of taking a breath and really thinking about what they're invested in and interested in. So yeah, and that's the goal of the gap year, right? So most folks are not trying to get you to go live a life of hiking in the woods and not going back to class and all the rest. So I hope that helps. Yes, we've got a hand up from iPhone.
Hi, this is Inbar, Ben
Hi,
Lowenstein's
Inbar.
mom. Hi,
Great.
sorry, I'm in the car and
No
I'm
worries.
I'm parked.
Yep.
I just wanted to add a little something to Nell's question about visiting colleges that are not in session. It's not necessarily the fact that it's not in session, but just wanted to suggest the idea that even if you can't have an official tour, but if you know a student who is currently studying in that school and you happen to be in the area, that too is beneficial. It's different, but it's still definitely a worthwhile visit. So consider that as an option.
Yep, absolutely. And I will say that if you have got schools on your list that have JCHS alumni there, and I would say that that's probably the majority of the schools on the majority of the list, feel free to drop me an email and say, I'm going to be at Oregon and Puget Sound and Lewis and Clark. Do we have any alums? Can you send me contact information? Because they, 90% of the time are thrilled to take another JCHS student around campus. So please let me help you get connected if you don't know folks there. Yeah, Vicky. Oh, you're on mute, so have to.
Sorry,
There
I
you
thought
go.
I tapped it, but
No worries.
enough. So since we're talking about touring, and I wanted to just also react to the person who talked about the tour that's a 6-hour drive. There are like some of the schools on my son's list, this is his list, not mine, are, if we're in the area, not hard to get to because they're near a city, or in a city. Some are like a 6-hour drive. And so my question is, how do you feel about the trade-off of visiting the sort of inconvenience of visiting a bunch of schools that are each far from each other and a long drive versus just applying to a longer list and then only visiting the ones you get into, and per se, perhaps that either doing like an online info session instead, and to like just for efficiency's sake, and like perhaps like planning that you budgeting for like 3 admit days or something, like their top 3 choices, they would go to the admit day in person. And so that is just sort of my question on that trade-off, because my son has, like I said, some of the schools are like middle of nowhere.
Yep. Yeah. I first of all will say I really don't think you have to see everything that ends up on the application list. I don't think you have to have looked at everything in order to apply to it. And certainly, there are stand-ins and types if the student has a relatively high number of medium-sized quasi-urban private campuses on their list. They are distinctive and different, but not that different, right? So if he knows that he likes 2 or 3 of them, then adding the 4th and the 5th sight unseen, I think is fine. And then yes, keeping some budget, both in terms of days and money, mainly in April of senior year. Most admission decisions come kind of the middle of March, but some will be the very last minute. I think the Ivies really like to have a grand finale at the end of March and all release, so like the last day of the month. So April of senior year is really when you've got a couple of weeks for that final decision, because May 1st is generally the universal reply date. So no, I don't think you have to go over the river and through the woods to every place that's out in the middle of nowhere. But definitely trying to do something virtual to at least get a sense of it would be helpful. And if we do have a JCHS student on campus, maybe to email a bit with them or jump on FaceTime just to get their sense of it. I think that totally makes sense. So I will say one thing. You had said, do we just apply to a longer list? And this is not directed at you specifically, Vicki, but just as a general PSA for everyone, I do really, and we've had a little runaway train with the senior class this year with a couple of kids. I really try and encourage folks to keep the list to around 10 schools. Now, if we get 11, 12, 13, especially if finances are a big driver to the process and you know you're going to need as much aid as possible and want to really try and diversify your options and the offers, fine, we can go a little bit higher than that. But there is absolutely no need to apply to 18, 19, 20 schools. The amount of time that takes, you are paying $75 or $80 per school in an application fee. There's individual writing. There is so much work that has to be done, and to do it well, that it's not a great use of anybody's time. And just to emphasize again that college admission is not a lottery. So the more schools doesn't mean the chances of your number coming up are going to be better. So really our goal in working towards October is to have a list of somewhere between, 10, maybe 12 schools. And it might be 2 if they're going to apply early decision somewhere, and get 1 or 2 applications out the door early and then wait. And then they may be done. So there is a range of things here, but I just want to keep sowing the seeds of more is not necessarily better. And then I'll work with each of your families and your children in particular on their particular needs. So. Question in the chat. Do you, Lauren, JCHS still offer support after gap year for college enrollment support? Enrollment support post gap year? Yes. I will say a couple of things about both alumni support and about post gap year. Typically, even if a student is thinking about a gap year, still want to encourage them to go through the process in senior year with their peers if the goal is eventually to be at a 4-year college. And I think our next coffee with Ms. Cook, I'm going to do a little bit more on gap year options and all of that specifically. So next month. But just know I still encourage folks to go through the process. You have me as support. You have your faculty members writing your recommendation letters. You are going through it with your peer culture. Most of the schools that our students are applying to are happy to grant a deferral for a gap year. So you can be admitted, you can save your spot. It is often a perfunctory thing of requesting the deferment. You say, I want to do a gap year. Here is could be very loose plan, but this is what I'm thinking. They will say, great, we will check back in with you next year in February or March. Please just pay that enrollment deposit fee, so we know you're coming, and we'll check in with you in a year. The exception to that would be California State Universities. So folks are thinking about Cal Poly, SF State, that system of 23 schools. It's a hard no on a gap year. So I still might encourage folks to think about applying in senior year. If you get in and you decline the offer, but apply again the next year, they've got a record that they admitted you once, and they've gone through the process of filling out the application. They know how to do it. So it's not to say you shouldn't apply to those. And then the UCs are typically okay with a gap year if you're going to Israel. They will have wording on their website that says we do not allow for gap years, and then in fine print, unless it's religious or military. And I found that even if you're not doing a seminary or not enlisting in the IDF, anything that says Israel on it, they interpret as religious, and we let them. So then the UCs are fine with you going abroad. Pretty much everybody else is going to let you defer. So most students do not need my assistance at the end of their gap year because they've got their plan and they continue to execute it. Sometimes during a gap year, students may decide that they want to reapply to a few more schools. Sometimes, especially if they're in Israel, they might think, well, I've heard from some friends here about some other places that might be more welcoming to Jewish students, or maybe, I've had students get more interested in thinking about the JTS, Jewish Theological Seminary program, or yeshiva during their gap year. So I'm happy to help if they want to throw a few more things in. But sometimes folks will enlist in the IDF at graduation, or they, will do some things to help perhaps scale up executive functioning issues. They are thinking it might be a longer runway for me to arrive at a four-year college, which is great, and then circle back to me a year or two later and say, hey, Ms. Cook, could we have a Zoom and talk a little bit about college? And I'm happy to do that. It does look a little different than during senior year in that I can't have 15 meetings with the student and answer every little question because I am trying to still obviously work with currently year kids, juniors and seniors, but I am available. And certainly I also help alums who arrive somewhere, spend a couple of months or maybe a year and think, I don't know if this is the right fit. I'm thinking about a transfer application, and I'm happy to help with that. I'm actually working with 3 alums on that right now and have a Zoom with one tomorrow. So I am still doing my role even after your kids graduate. Sarah, you have a question.
I do, and it's a total change of subject, if that's
Love it.
okay.
Let's do it.
Because I have a question about test prep and test prep classes.
Yeah.
I've looked online and some of them are really intense. It's like we do 20 hours and 8 practice exams. And I am not sure I want to put Theo through that. And I'm 100% sure Theo doesn't want to put Theo through that.
Yeah.
So he's gonna do the ACT test in April.
Mhm.
Do we really have to do something very intense? Can he do a sort of 4-session kind of thing? Or, like what is the benefit of these things really, other than some practice?
Right, right. Yeah, I think first of all, I think it depends on the student, of course, as to how much is required, and also then the aspirations of the student and how high we're trying to get the test score, and then where the practice test started and how big that leap is, right? I think Theo's leap is not so big. But in terms of test prep, you've got a range of options. So there's a fair amount that's free online. I will say both the College Board and ACT have gotten better about offering some free things on their sites, whether that is content drilling or whether that is at least one full-length test. And when you're doing test prep, it's both. It is content. It is, do you actually know some of the math they're asking you about, right? But it is also sort of time management and self-management of the timing with testing. So that's why those full-length tests, I think, can be really helpful, because you are going through the motions and understanding the pacing of making sure you're completing everything and managing your own sort of emotional response to the experience, whether that is anxiety or exhaustion or whatever, right? So most test prep sort of packages are going to toggle between both, saying like, we're going to offer some time tests to you, and then we're going to look at those results and do some content drilling on, what you did wrong, and talk about, how you felt, right, during those test prep, during the longer practice tests. There are one-on-one tutoring options for that. That's sort of the most expensive sort of option. And there's classes, and that could be, cheaper. The issue with classes that you are going to end up with a very sort of set package in that way, that this class is running 10 weeks. You're going to do this many practice tests. You're going to have this many sessions of content, and it is not going to be personalized. So if Theo knows what he's doing with the English stuff and doing great, and then math has, some areas he needs to work on, this is just guessing, he's still gonna have to sit through all that English that everybody else needs to be drilled on, right, to get to the math. So there's some drawbacks to where you get the savings, right, on the class. So working with a tutor, I think it can be a little bit more responsive, and some places might still have a hard package they're trying to sell you on. So I would look and see if there's some flexibility with tutors around, I would want like a month's worth of stuff, right? That might be a couple of sessions, 3 practice tests, and then, bang, we're done. Every test prep company is a little panicked that testing is in a nebulous place, and so they are going to try and lock you in for what they can. But I would say that we have had families be quite happy with Compass, which is expensive, Revolution Prep, which can do more stuff online, AJ tutoring is a little more popular in the peninsula, but that's one to look into. I think they also do some things online. And I don't know if other folks in the room have had older children that worked with somebody else that you would recommend. But yeah, those are, and then my handbook also has, I think, one or two other links that are not coming to mind for me. But if you go to the College Advising Handbook on Testing, there's some things there. But I definitely, if you're not sure whether to spend $3,000 on something that's going to take 2 months, give me a call or send me an email and we can hash it out a little bit about whether that's worth it for your particular child. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Thanks.
Great. And it looks like Vicky said Ben uses Prep Matters. So yeah, you can check that out. There's always new testing stuff popping up too. It's hard for me to keep track of because there are certainly some just mom and pop shop tutor folks who can be great and less expensive. And then those who aren't, they're just like, I got into Harvard. I can help you get into Harvard. And we don't know whether they actually have good teaching skills. So. Other questions? We've been running through a range of issues here, which is great. Well, I'll give you just a quick preview of what I'm thinking for this spring with other coffees with Miss Cook. As I said, I'm thinking next month I'll do a little more content on gap years in particular. And then the balance of the time will be for just open questions again. I will probably she is a parent, but she is also going to try and have on her school hat as well. Julie Beck, just say a few words about the social emotional piece of this process and how to hold your own anxiety, concerns, excitement, energy around it with what your child might be holding and needing. And then last year, for the first time, I also brought in 3 friends that work in college admission offices at some point in the spring. So whether that might be March or May, I have to see what their schedules look like. But I had someone from Scripps, Syracuse, and UCLA pop in for a casual conversation. And I think folks found that helpful, both to find that they're human beings, just like the rest of us, and really want to help your kids, and to just have some frequently asked questions answered. So that's my general thoughts about the spring. I will send some more dates and content as we get closer to those. But all right. Oh, and there's a question about, are you going to offer a sports athletics seminar? Great question. I will often draft on to other schools that might be doing something joint. That happened last spring. So this is around the time where I start to hear about those invites. I just got something on more arts focused programs. So if that is offered, I will push that out to everyone. We often there's a woman who lives in the East Bay, JT, oh wow, now I'm thinking of my friend who works for Tufts, JT Thomas. She has been the girls soccer coach at Cal and is an independent college counselor and does a lot of advising specifically for student athletes. And so she will often hold a session that is helpful for folks, particularly that are thinking about playing at Division II and III schools. So not the folks that are big recruited and have signing ceremonies with fireworks, but the folks that have to make themselves a bit more known to coaches on their own. But in the meantime, if your child is thinking that they might want to play in college, especially at like the Division III level, I have a addendum expansion to the College Advising Handbook about athletics in particular that I will typically send after our first meeting together, that has a sample athletics resume, some sample emails you can send to coaches, how to think about making a highlight reel. All of this has been vetted by Coach Moeller and comes from some of JT Thomas's advice about how to kind of do some outreach and get yourself on coaches' radar screens and see if they bite. And if then you might have some recruitment options for college. So, and Nell, I know I'm meeting with Razel as soon as I get into school today, so she and I can talk about that. Yeah. All right. If you share JT's contact info, yes, I will be sure to do that. Great. All right. Well, it looks like we're running out of questions here, so I think we may close. you know where to find me. We will do this again next month, and I hope that everyone has a good weekend and is excited about getting started with all of this. So enjoy your Thursday, everyone. Have a good one.